No One is the newest hero to the Massiverse, and with them comes a neo-noir crime thriller with multimedia elements. This story will seem to follow two sides. One briefly follows our titular hero No One, a hacker who exposes the crimes of high-profile figures, and the other follows Julia Page, a reporter covering the murders caused by the exposures. The multimedia element of this series is that there's a podcast that's hosted by the character Julia Page. The podcast is Who is No One, and you can listen to it on Spotify. Each episode is released alongside each issue and gives more context and information to the story, though it's not necessary to listen to it. I will give a bit of a hefty intro providing the context and timeline of the events leading up to issue 1. If you just want to get into the issue, you can click on the timestamp in the description. But the story thrusts us into the middle of an ongoing case, and I want to catch you guys up the best I can, using this handy timeline and the information from the podcast. In the summer of 2022, No One begins posting on this website where they give a manifesto. Later, No One threatens to dox a Dr. Julian Cologne if he does not reveal his crimes to the public within a week. 7 days later, No One data drops information showing Dr. Cologne was conducting unethical and illegal radiation experiments on Puerto Rican inmates. No One would do this again to an Edwin Lin for mass money laundering and wire fraud, and again to State Senator Noah Kemp for funneling public funds, and finally, again to a Louis Capel, whose crimes I'll explain later in the video. Things escalate in autumn of 2022 when the first person that No One doxed, Dr. Cologne, is killed by 4 gunshots to the chest. Sometime later, Edwin Lin, the second person doxed, is killed the same way with identical rounds, connecting the two murders. Police would also find graffiti at the second murder that says, "Held accountable, Roe." Police would then dub these killings the accountability murders and nickname the murderer Richard Roe. No One would go on to post online that he condemns these killings, saying it's a perversion of justice, letting the dead take the secrets to the grave. Things come to a head when one night Richard Roe attempts to murder the third doxed person, Senator Noah Kemp, in his home. No One makes his first physical appearance and saves Senator Kemp. Police would arrive and both No One and Richard Roe would escape capture. By winter of 2022, police are tipped off, presumably by No One, that Richard Roe is squatting at an abandoned furnace building. Police raid and apprehend the serial killer, who was already restrained, again presumably by No One. In early 2023, Richard Roe, while in jail, is visited by Shift, who obtains his real identity, Aaron James Kern, and sells that information to journalists, who make it public. Unfortunately, things blow up as copycat killers start appearing. The first copycat killer attempts to kill someone but is apprehended by No One. A second copycat does kill someone but is again apprehended by No One. And with all that, we're up to speed and I can begin issue 1. Our story opens at an art gallery with a man telling an unimpressed woman what he thinks a painting is saying. He tries tying it to the recent string of murders in the neighborhood. She stops him and takes him outside for some privacy. As they get intimate, she screams and we next see a body on the ground. The body has 4 wounds to the chest, presumably by gunshots. The next page, we get a title drop as we get a great look at No One as he overlooks the crime scene investigation. We close in on 2 detectives. The man vents that they should just shoot Richard Roe in the same fashion as his victims to scare off any future copycat killers. The names of the detectives are August Singh and Kate Harper. An experienced-looking detective approaches them from behind and Singh stumbles out an apology for saying that. The experienced detective walks off and is then given a note that was found in the jacket pocket of the victim. We learn that the detective's name is Ben as an officer calls him over. The officer tells Detective Ben that the chief of police has ordered him to immediately leave the crime scene. Without a fight, he leaves, and we learn that though Ben is a respected detective, he isn't allowed to work on this case for some reason. The next page takes us to the bottom of the building where police are holding back nosy reporters. One woman gets out of a taxi and heads towards one officer in particular and begins asking questions about the crime scene. He spills that the assistant chief is there and that the victim has 4 gunshot wounds to the chest. He also reveals that the victim's name is Louis Capel, the third person who was doxed by No One. The next panel shows Ben leaving the building. As he leaves, a reporter calls him by his full name, Ben Kern, and asks if his son is responsible for the attack. It seems his son, Aaron Kern, was the one who began the accountability murders and inspired the Richard Roe copycat killers. At this point, there is now a third copycat killer, who is on the loose, and it seems to be picking off the remaining people doxed by No One. On the next page, we follow those 2 detectives as they interview and question the family of Louis Capel. The wealthy family isn't cooperative, however, as they believe the police want them to confirm the information about the data drop. No One doxed and data dropped information showing Capel was a slumlord who cut corners building apartments with unsafe conditions and using do-not-hire contractors. One building would end up catching fire and kill 14 people, the direct result of the money-saving practices of Capel. The family stays quiet and the detectives leave. We also get a close-up of a suspicious car in the background. The next page takes us to a graveyard where Detective Ben is talking to a grave. A man approaches Ben, calling him Dad, and we see the name of the grave is Naomi Kern, Ben's deceased wife. We learn here that Detective Ben has two sons, Aaron Kern, who is currently in jail, and Michael Kern, who is implied to be a recovering addict. Ben and Michael talk about the uncomfortable truth that Aaron is a serial killer and argue if they should visit him. Ben leaves, saying the two should just get lunch for now. Sometime later, Ben arrives at the jail Aaron is being held at and meets with his son. Aaron asks about his brother and the two squabble for a bit before Ben gets to the real reason why he's there. He reveals to Aaron that Louis Capel was killed 4 shots to the chest by a third copycat killer who left a note. The note reading, "I am the real Richard Rowe." Aaron asks if the note and Ben's visit mean he wants him to tell the police that he's innocent, that it wasn't him. Ben's plan doesn't seem to work, if that was his plan, and decides to leave. As Ben drives off in his car, we get a radio summarizing the events so far. There is valid criticism in the commentary saying Ben Kern's proximity as chief of police is affecting the protection no one's doxed victims aren't receiving, that someone should hold Ben accountable. As this is being said, a shadow approaches Ben's car. It's a masked man with a gun. Ben stares the man down and tells him to do it, and the man obliges. Just then, no one flies into the scene and punches the man down. The man fires the gun again, but no one raises his arms and his gauntlets protect him from the gunshots. No one begins beating down the attacker, but the gun goes off and fires into Ben's neck. The situation gives the attacker an opening to get away and picking up his gun in the process. Instead of going after the attacker, no one tends to Ben's wounds. Ben struggles to ask, "Who are you?" and we get a monologue of no one's manifesto over a slurry of panels. First, we see Ben's son, Michael, walking through alleyways. We see Detective Singh walking to his car. We then see Julia Page at home. The car then turns on its headlights and follows Michael. The driver of the car has a gun. Detective Singh gets into his own car as someone calls out to him. They then tell him that the shell casings at the Louis Capel murder match the ones found at the original Richard Rowe murders. We cut back to the driving gunman as he fires and kills Michael and leaving behind 5 shell casings, and we end issue 1. This is the most intense start to a story within the Massiverse. There's lots of information outside of it to add on as well. That being said, it's all admittedly ancillary. That website I mentioned earlier is real and you can visit it. There's lots of details here that show how evil the men that no one stalks are. The podcast is fine, though it's not really exciting to be honest. As far as Noah himself, I'm a big fan of his look and his character. People over on the official Massiverse Discord, link in the description, have guessed his gauntlets could be radiant tech. For his character and motives, I'm all for it. Out of all the heroes so far, none of them have attempted making a huge difference at the status quo. They've all been reactive to petty crimes as opposed to going after larger figures who commit far worse offensives, but no one notices because they're committed by pen and paper. The interesting angle of this series' conflict is that no one wants to bring to light criminals via digital exposure, but in doing so, he started a movement of blind rage where victims do not receive justice. Sure, that monstrous doctor and awful slumlord got shot like the dogs they are, but what about those families affected by the deaths they cause? Where are the funds and resources stolen from them? The victims don't gain anything from these acts of revenge. There is no healing or hope. I hope by issue 2 we get no one's POV of things and see his methods and thoughts on what he's caused. Anyways, thank you for watching.